Okay, here's the share screen. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. It's Rabbi Akiva Males, and I hope that you're well. Today is Wednesday. It is July the 14th, and this Shabbos is going to be Shabbos Devarim, which is also known as Shabbos Chazon, because it's the Shabbos that immediately precedes Tisha B'Av. And I think we're in the middle of the period of the 9 days leading up to Tisha B'Av. I'd share some Divrei Torah with you that pertain to the 9 days. I want to start with a beautiful story involving Rav Kook. Rav Kook, the first chief rabbi of Israel, pre-state Israel. And Rav Kook, as we know, was a great Talmud Chacham. He was a student of the Volozhin Yeshiva. He had served as a rabbi in Eastern Europe before arriving at Israel. And he did a lot of work. He was perhaps best known for trying as best as he could to bring many non-observant Jews who were playing a huge role in settling the land of Israel, to trying to bring them closer to Torah and mitzvahs observance. I saw a beautiful story Cook that revolves around the 9 days that we're in the middle of now, and I want to share it with you. It's in a sefer, it's in a book I have at home. It's called Silver from the Land of Israel. It was written by Rabbi Hanan Morrison. Rabbi Hanan Morrison, I also found it online at Rabbi Morrison's website. I have the link there. But Rabbi Morrison is an American. He made Aliyah years ago, and he loved the writing of Rav Kook. The problem with Rav Kook's writing, I don't want to say problem, I'd say the challenge, is that he wrote in a very poetic Hebrew, and it was very unfamiliar to many of us. What Rabbi Morrison wanted to do was break down a lot of Rav Kook's writings and make them more accessible. So he broke them down to the Parsha, he broke them down to Yom Tovim, and here was something that, and he translated them as well. So here's something that translated from Rabbi Kook. It involves around the 9 days. Look at this story, beautiful story. The Poel Mizrahi kitchen. Things were not looking good for Avram Mavrach. It was already the first of the month of Av, and the secretary would not let him present his urgent question to the chief rabbinate, meaning the chief rabbi was Rav Kook. The rabbis were in an important meeting, the secretary explained, and could not be disturbed. Mr. Avram Mavrach was a founding member of the Poel Mizrahi, established in 1922 for religious pioneers in Eretz Yisrael. One of the most important decisions made during the first assembly of the Poel Mizrahi was to open kosher kitchens for new immigrants and workers. This was necessary since the religious workers could not eat in the Histadrut kitchens, where non-kosher food was served and Sabbath was desecrated. As Avram later described in the Hatzofeh newspaper, the religious pioneers suffered greatly. They could not afford to eat in a restaurant and enjoy a hot meal, and on Shabbos, they missed the Jewish milieu and atmosphere of holiness. Therefore, we established the kitchens of the Poel Mizrahi to provide the religious workers with inexpensive and tasty meals, and also serve as a social center. The workers would read, hold meetings, discuss, attend classes and lectures. They organized Torah classes in the evenings. They would dance on joyous occasions. The kitchens were filled with singing, especially on Shabbos and the holidays. They sang the Zmiros with holy yearnings and great emotion. It is not surprising that these kosher kitchens also attracted many non-religious workers. So this was a massive undertaking that Poel Mizrahi did to have these kosher kitchens set up, and you could see the need that they were filling. Although the food was sold at cost, not all of the diners could afford to eat everything on the menu. However, the meat portions and soups were a necessary staple for the hungry manual laborers, because you could imagine the amount of calories they were burning, and they needed these hearty meals. Okay, next paragraph. The problem with the 9 days. It was regarding these meat meals that a serious problem arose. During the 9 days of Av, eating meat is prohibited due to national mourning over the destruction of the temple. The administrators of the Jerusalem branch of Poel Mizrahi met to find an alternative for the meat meals, especially for the manual laborers. Unfortunately, they were unable to think of an appropriate substitute. Some of them despaired. Why should we assume responsibility for this? Lacking a better alternative, they wanted to close down the kitchen for the duration of the 9 days. One member, however, refused to give up, Avram Mavrach. He suggested turning to the chief rabbinate. Perhaps the rabbis would find a leniency that would permit the new customers to eat meat, so they would not go back to eating in the non-kosher kitchens. The other members laughed at his suggestion. Do you really think the rabbinate will agree to the slaughter of sheep and oxen during the 9 days in the holy city of Jerusalem? In fact, no one was even willing to accompany Avram to the chief rabbinate. So on the first of Av, he went alone. The rabbinate secretary, however, refused to let him interrupt the meeting in order to speak with the rabbis. But it's an urgent question, Avram explained. I come as a representative of the Pol Mizrahi. At Avram's insistence, Rabbi Shmuel Weber, chief secretary of the rabbinate, came out of the meeting and listened to the problem. Rabbi Weber suggested arranging for the completion of a Talmudic tractate every day and then serving meat at the Seudas mitzvah, a meat celebrating the fulfillment of a mitzvah. Avram responded, such an arrangement would be nearly impossible to implement. Rabbi Weber then disappeared into the rabbinate chambers. After a few minutes, he beckoned Avram to follow. So again, just to put this in perspective, what's going on? So you have Paul Mizrahi has set up these kitchens. They are playing an integral role in helping religious immigrants who want to work and help settle the land of Israel. This is enabling them to keep kosher. At the same token, they've also attracted non-religious workers to come and eat kosher food because they love the Avirah, they love the atmosphere, they love the Ruach, there's Zmiros and whatnot. And they said, now we've got a problem because it's the 9 days. And what are we going to do? We can't serve meat meals, and the kitchen, they need their calories, they need their stuff. What are we going to do? They made a suggestion. Why don't you have a Seudas mitzvah, make a siyum every night? He says, that's just not practical. How are we going to line people up for the siyum? It's just not going to work in such short order. So now he says, come on in. We're going to talk to Rav Kook. Rav Kook's decision. As he entered, Avram saw Rav Kook at the head of the table with Rav Yaakov Meir to his right and other prominent rabbis. I believe Rabbi Yaakov Meir was the Sephardic chief rabbi at that time, and other prominent rabbis seated around the table. Rav Kook asked Avram to approach the table. Avram stood before the rabbis and explained the purpose of the kitchen, describing the great benefit it provided to the members of Pol Mizrahi and the workers who remained faithful to their heritage. I'm aware of the importance of this kitchen, Rav Kook responded. He then sank into deep thought. The other rabbis waited in silence for Rav Kook's decision. Rav Kook turned to Avram. Do you think that some of the workers who eat there will end up going to a non-kosher kitchen? Meaning if you're closed for the 9 days? So yes, Avram responded, they ate there beforehand. If that is the case, Rav Kook pronounced, your kitchen is serving a Seudas mitzvah. Let the humble eat and be satisfied. Avram, astounded, Avram remained frozen to his spot. Rav Kook smiled. Do you have another question? Avram replied that he was uncertain about the Rav's decision. Did this mean that everyone could eat meat there? Rav Kook repeated his words and explained that everyone, even those who would not be tempted to eat at a non-kosher kitchen, could eat meat in the kitchen because it would be serving a Seudas mitzvah. Despite his amazement, Avram managed to steal a glance at the other rabbis in the room. It seemed that they too were surprised by the Rav's decision, but they raised no objections. Last part, Seudas mitzvah for all. Rabbi Tzvi Kaplan, I'm not 100% sure who this is, wrote an article analyzing this unusual halachic decision at length. It would be interesting to see that article. For the workers who would have eaten in the non-kosher kitchen, it's clearly preferable that they disregard the custom of not eating meat during the 9 days rather than violate the biblical prohibition against eating non-kosher food. But how could Rav Kook permit meat to those who would not have eaten non-kosher food? Rabbi Kaplan noted that at a Seudas mitzvah during the 9 days, permission to eat meat is granted not only for those performing the mitzvah, such as a bris milah or completing a tractate of Talmud, right? It's not just the Baal Simcha who's allowed to eat meat, but for all who are present. Everyone who's present at that Seudas mitzvah can also eat meat. Every Jew is responsible to make sure another Jew eats kosher food. A meal that accomplishes this goal certainly qualifies as a Seudas mitzvah. The simple meals provided by the Pol Mizrahi kitchen in those years saved many Jews from eating non-kosher meals. Rav Kook therefore was able to permit all present to eat, since as he explained, your kitchen is serving a Seudas mitzvah. What a beautiful story. And what a perspective there. So there was Rav Kook paskening around the table where all these Rabbanim, everyone was surprised, but no one objected. And Rav Kook's point is that's a Seudas mitzvah. You're enabling, you are bringing others closer to Torah, and you are enabling them to eat kosher food. That's a Seudas mitzvah. That's as if you're made a siyum. That's a Seudas mitzvah. And what do we know at a Seudas mitzvah? Not just the Baal Simcha, but everyone present could eat meat. So too, if that's really what's going on in your kitchens, that you are bringing in people who would be eating non-kosher food, and they're enjoying kosher food because of you, so that's a Seudas mitzvah, and therefore all of you can eat meat at that event. Very, very interesting, and it's inspiring. It also just it helps us. It reignites in us the sense of responsibility we should feel for all of our fellow Jews, all of our brothers and sisters, is that anything that we can do to help move anyone in the right direction towards a greater appreciation or a greater commitment to Torah and mitzvos, that's an incredible celebration. Anytime that we have the opportunity to take part in something like that, that's an incredible celebration. As a result of that, we should view it as a Sudas mitzvah as well. Not saying that under our circumstances, we can go ahead and have meat at all these meals in the 9 days. That could have been very unique to that situation in the 1920s. And the poverty that was around in Israel, and the hard work, everything that was going on was factored into that decision that Rav Kook made for that particular moment in history. But nonetheless, the attitude is there for eternity, that any move, anything that we can do to bring another Jew closer to Torah, to mitzvahs, to an appreciation of Torah and mitzvahs is an incredible opportunity. And that is a Sudas mitzvah. That's absolutely a beautiful story, the way I see it. And it really should inspire all of us to look for opportunities and look for ways. What can we do to try and bring other Jews closer to Torah and to mitzvahs? All right, let's move on to the next one. Here's something that I think I only really saw this done when I was a kid at camp, and perhaps I had one friend who did this as well. If you open your siddur and go to benching, it really doesn't make a difference what siddur. It'll probably be in almost every siddur. You go to benching, you open your bencher, and you go to benching. You'll find two things before benching. You'll find Shir Amalos, which we're all used to because we sing Shir Amalos on a Shabbos, on a Yom Tov, or anytime there's a Sudas mitzvah going on, we'll sing Shir Amalos before we bench. But you'll also find Psalm 137, Perek Kuf Lamed Zayin from Tehillim, that's known as Al Naros Bavel. And you'll find the instructions in most benchers are following what we're about to see now. It says, and this is in the Shulchan Aruch, right at the beginning, the first section in the Shulchan Aruch, Roi L'chol Yarei Shamayim. It is fitting, it's appropriate for anyone who's got an awe of heaven. There's not talking about Tisha B'Av, there's talking about throughout the year. Any Jew who has the fear of heaven in them should really feel a sense of anguish and a sense of great concern about the destruction of the temple. We're living in a world with no Beis HaMikdash. That should bother us. It's very hard because all that we know is a post-Beis HaMikdash world. So it's very hard for us to feel this properly, and it's something we need to work on. And what goes on during the 9 days by these ways that Chazal and our ancestors had for us about how we minimize our joy in the month of Av, that helps put us in that mindset, but it doesn't come naturally. It's very, very difficult because we never knew the world with a Beis HaMikdash. But the Shulchan Aruch says right at the beginning that it is incumbent upon any Jew who wants to feel that we've got an awe of heaven, that we should feel a sense of distress and concern about the fact that there is no Beis HaMikdash. It was destroyed. The Chafetz Chaim, in his commentary, the Mishnah Brura, look what he writes now. That's the next item on the bottom of the page. Churban Beis HaMikdash, that we should feel a sense of distress and loss about the fact that Beis HaMikdash was destroyed. Kasav Shalah, the Shnei Luchos HaBris, that's Rabbi Yeshaya Halevi Horowitz, living in the 1600s. So Rabbi Horowitz wrote a very famous ethical work called Shalah Shnei Luchos HaBris. So the Mishnah Brura quotes the Shalah. He says, Kasav Shalah, Shebechol Suda, at any meal where there was bread served, so before we bench, Yomer Al Naros Bavel, if it's during the week, we're supposed to recite Al Naros Bavel, that's Kuf Lamed Zayin, chapter 137 of Tehillim, with Shabbos, but if it's a Shabbos, or on any celebratory day when Tachnan's not recited, Yomer Shir Amalos B'Shuv Hashem. That's what we should say. The Iker, and the main point to remember, Sheyeda Ma Ka'amar, a person should know and be aware of what words they're saying. The Achar Kavanas Halev and Advarim, after the intent that we've got in our homes, that's the most important thing that'll direct the words that we say. So the Chafetz Chaim is quoting the Shalah. Interestingly, there's no one earlier than the Shalah who writes this. Shalah says he has idea. Apparently, it's based on a Kabbalistic idea from the Zohar, and he says that before we bench, we are supposed to, if it's a regular weekday, we should recite Al Naros Bavel. If it's Shabbos or Yom Tov, any day there's no Tachnun, we say Shir HaMalos. About you, but I'm not that familiar with too many people who recite Al Naros Bavel on an ongoing basis. I think I had one friend. I had one friend that I remember he would do this, but I'm just not familiar. And this, despite the fact you'll find this in just about every sitter and just about every bencher, I'm not familiar with this being done. I seem to remember as a kid at camp that during the 9 days, not the whole summer, but during the 9 days, as a way to get us to feel that we were in the month of Av, because we were having such a fun time at camp. So you still had to do something to remind us that we're in Av and Tisha B'Av is on the horizon. Before benching, at camp, we would sing Al Naros Bavel. I don't remember the full tune that they used, but it was a very mournful, mooning tune. It started off Al Naros Bavel, Al Naros Bavel Shom Yashavnu. But I don't remember the rest of it. I tried during the week. I have to ask Layla. She's mouthing it to me in the background. I'll ask her to help me with this. But I could not remember the tune that they used. But outside of camp, and I was just talking about this with Layla during the week, I think a lot of the chinuch that I received about Tisha B'Av was from camp, because think about it, school is never running during Tisha B'Av. So how are we supposed to learn all the other Yom Tovim? We learn about what goes into it and what we're supposed to celebrate. We learn about that at school. It's during the school year. But Tisha B'Av, how do we learn about Tisha B'Av? So everything I have about Tisha B'Av is really from camp. That's just another good reason why being in an environment, a strong Jewish environment in the summer is important for kids, because how else are we going to absorb Tisha B'Av? Yeah, we can get some at home and some at shul, but there's nothing that could beat that the camp spirit, that what goes on there. By the way, so the question is raised, and I saw many people raise this. If this is brought down, the Mishnah Berurah brings this from the Shalah, why is this so uncommon? And a couple of answers I saw is, number one, no one earlier than the Shalah records this. So until the 1600s, this was never codified anywhere. You don't find the Rishonim talk about this, the early commentators, you don't find the Gemara talking about this. So it was an Eitzah Tova, it's a very nice idea from the Shalah, but in terms of this being obligatory every single day, every weekday to say this, that could be the reason why it's just not common. But again, I'm thinking about this growing up. I think the only time I remember this being recited, not at school, but it was during the 9 days at camp. Because of the fact that there's this idea of looking at Al Naros Bavel specifically during this time, I want to go through that kapitel. I want to go through that paragraph of Tehillim with you. It's not a long paragraph, but let's go through it together. Let's look at what's being said, what's being written about in Al Naros Bavel, and we'll see why it was appropriate, seen as appropriate to be recited during this period of time. So Al Naros Bavel, like Sefer Tehillim, was composed or compiled by David HaMelech. Many of the commentators say David HaMelech, King David, had through Nevuah, through some prophetic vision, that the first Beis HaMikdash was going to be destroyed by the Babylonians, and the Jews would find themselves exiled to Bavel. And based on that, this is what he composed. Al Naros Bavel, it was along the rivers of Bavel, Babylon. Sham Yashavnu, that's where we sat, Gam Bechinu, and we cried. B'zachrenu es Tzion, when we remembered Zion, remembered Tzion in Yerushalayim. On the willows, meaning because we were against the river, there's willows growing along the river. By the willows in its midst, that's where we hung our harps. Apparently, many of the Jews had brought harps with them when they left Yerushalayim. We'll see Rashi gives us some more insight into that. And they said, we have no more use for these. We're going to hang them up here on the willows. Gimel, 3, Kisham She'elunu, because that's the point where our captors asked us, Shulenu Shuvenu, our captors, Shuvenu is our captors. That's where our captors asked of us, Divrei Shir. They asked us for song. They wanted us to sing for them. The Sololenu Simcha. And our tormentors asked us for all sorts of joy. Shirulanu Mishir Tzion. Do us a favor, oh Jew boy. Sing for us some of your beloved songs of Zion. We heard that you guys had some great nigunim. You had some great songs that you used to sing back in Yerushalayim. Sing us some of them. That's what our conquerors asked of us. Daled, what was our response? Ech nashira, shir Hashem al admas nechar. But it can't be done. How could we sing the song of the Lord on foreign soil? These were songs that were reserved. We'll see Rashi soon what he tells us. These were songs that were reserved for special occasions. We can't sing them here in Bavel for our tormentors. Hey, very famous part. If I forget you, O Jerusalem, may my right hand forget its skill. Vav, 6. Tidbak l'shoni l'chiki. Let my tongue cling to my palate. If I don't remember you, if I don't bring up, if I don't mention Jerusalem and the fact that we're missing it at the beginning of all my joy, this is why this is always sung. Or if it's not sung, in recent years it's always been sung under the chuppah at a wedding before the chassan smashes the glass. For many years it wasn't sung, but the chassan would say it, would pronounce it. It's like I remember pronouncing this pasuk before I smashed the glass. This is what you do. There's this idea that even though we're at a moment of great celebration, we have to recall the fact that we're missing something. We're missing Yerushalayim. Let's see Zion. Zechor Hashem livnei Edom. God, oh God, please remember for the sons of Edom as Yom Yerushalayim, the day of Jerusalem. Ha'omrim Aru, those who say raise it, Aru, raise it, Adi Yisod Ba, down to its foundation. So we're saying, Hashem, never forget what our tormentors have done, how they destroyed Yerushalayim and how they tore it to pieces. Ches, Bas Bavel Asheduda, O daughter of Babylon, Ashrei Shishalim Lach. You are destined to be plundered, and praiseworthy is the enemy that repays you for all you've done for us. In other words, God will reward the enemy that destroys Bavel to basically take vengeance for all that Bavel did to us, Babylonia did to us. As Gemalech Shegamal Anu, will repay you for the treatment, everything you've done to us. Tes, the final verse, Ashrei Shiochez v'nipes es olayich alasela. And what we're basically doing is we're recalling some of the horrors we faced, and we're saying that you should have to deal with some of the horrors we faced, and whoever is the perpetrator who places this crime on you, God will pay them back. God will reward whoever pays you back, giving you midah keneged midah, measure for measure. And it's a fairly ghastly way to end it, that last sentence, that last verse, Tes, Ashrei shiochez v'nipes es olayich alasela. Praiseworthy will be the one who takes your children, your infants, and dashes them, and smashes them against the rocks. Basically, they're saying, that's what you did to us. You took our children and you brutalized them. You killed them in such a horrible fashion. That's coming your way. God's going to make certain that you get midah keneged midah, that you're going to get paid back measure for the brutality in which you treated our people. And God will reward whatever nation it is who does this to you. He will reward them for giving you what it is that you deserve. So it ends on a very hostile, you might say, fashion. But the El Naros Bavel, what we're doing is we're talking about the beginning, about how when we were led into captivity in Bavel and Babylon, which is modern day Iraq, when we were led into captivity, something traumatic happened. We sat there at the riverbanks, and it says that our tormentors wanted us to sing, and we hung up our harps. Let's look at Rashi. Rashi sheds a little bit more light on this, and then I'm going to share with you a medrash that I remember one of my Rabbeim in Yeshiva shared that shares an incredible amount there. Okay, so here we go. It says, Rashi, Al Naros Bavel Sham Yashavnu. So it says, by the rivers of Babylon, that's where we sat. Kishiyaradnu Legola, when we were brought down into exile, the Babylonian exile, the Sha'alem Nebuchadnezzar, who was the leader of the Babylonians, who destroyed the Beis HaMikdash and brutalized the Jewish people, he asked of us, Sheyashiru lo, that we should sing for him, Kimo Shahim Meshorerin ala Duchan, the same songs that we would sing for him on the Duchan. Where is the Duchan? In the Beis HaMikdash. Who sang on the Duchan? The Leviim. So we're talking about the Leviim. The beginning of this is talking specifically to the Leviim. That's why they had their harps. They were the musicians of the Beis HaMikdash, the orchestra of the Beis HaMikdash, the choir of the Beis HaMikdash. They found themselves being marched to captivity. And what happened is Nebuchadnezzar and his fellows, they want to rejoice over this victory that they had over the Jews. And they say, hey, perfect. We need song. We need music to help us celebrate. You guys have some great tunes. You Leviim, you were the orchestra, and you were the song, you were the choir in your old temple. So do us a favor, sing us some of your greatest hits. And the Leviim were crushed, and they said, we can't do that. Those songs were reserved for the Beis HaMikdash. They were reserved for singing in Hashem's temple. We're going to take our musical instruments that we use to sing to God, and we're going to take our voices and our songs that we use to sing his praises, and we're going to sing them to you, you Russia, you evil maniac who destroyed the Beis HaMikdash, brutalized the Jewish people, killed untold numbers of us. What are you, crazy? That can't be done. That's how Rashi explains this. Let's take it one step further. I'm going to share with you what the Medrash says on this. The Medrash adds another piece to this. I was not aware of this Medrash until I remember one of my Rabbi in Yeshiva shared it with me. And I want to share with you, shared it with us when he was speaking one time. Rabbi Naiman, Zechron Livracha, Rabbi Chaim Shmuel Naiman, Zatzal, he is a grandfather to two of the women in our community, Leah Semmel, as well as Eliza Gelb, are granddaughters of his. So it would be their paternal grandfather, Rabbi Naiman. So he shared with us this medrash once when he was talking to us, and he had a very powerful point. I want to share that with you. Here's a medrash that gives a little bit more detail into this incident of the Levium being harassed by Nebuchadnezzar and his generals to sing their songs from the Beis HaMikdash. It's from the Pesikta Rabasi. Here we go. It says as follows. Amar lam Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar says to Levium, Matem Yoshim Abochim, what are you guys doing? You're just sitting around, you captives? You're just sitting around at the riverbank crying? Vu Korela Shivto Shalevi. He calls over the Levium, and he says to them, Hachinu atzmachem. Prepare yourselves. Ad shanu ochlim v'shosim. Me and my officers, we're about to have our lunch. We're about to have a big meal. So I want you to entertain us while we're having our big meal. So he says, Ani mavakesh, I request of you, shetamdu, I want you all to stand up, v'takishu lefanai b'kinoros, and I want you to play your harps, shalachem, kiderech she'isem makishem bebeis hamikdash shalachem afnei elokechem. I want you to play your harps and play your musical songs for me, the same tunes that you used to play in your Beis HaMikdash. I heard they're pretty good. So I want you to play for me your greatest hits while me and my officers enjoy a great meal. Mistaklim elu ve'elu. So the Levium, they look at one another. Va'amru, and they say to each other, Lo dayenu she'charvadnu beis mikdasho. Not enough. It's not enough that this Russia, this evil fellow Nebuchadnezzar, he destroyed the Beis HaMikdash b'avnasenu due to our great sins. Ela achshav anu omdim lahakish b'kinorasenu lefnei hananas hazeh. But now he wants us to play our harps for this midget. Now, why they're calling him a midget is a matter of dispute. They may have been calling him a midget just because they were saying he was a spiritual midget. This is someone who is just a nothing as far as we're concerned, as far as spirituality, and is not a God-fearing person. There are other midrashim that say that was literal, that they say that Nebuchadnezzar, like Paro, you'll find this also about Paro, was, according to some midrashim, was a midget, was lacking in height. So whatever the case may be, whether they were calling him a spiritual midget or a literal midget, they said it's not enough. This fellow first destroyed the Beis HaMikdash. Now he wants us to play the songs for the Beis HaMikdash to entertain him? Absolutely not. So what do? Miyad amdu kulam. All the Levium stood up, v'natlu etza, and they took. They were of the same plan. Talu kinorosayim. They hung up their harps. Ba'aravos shayusham. They hung up their harps, saying, "We refuse to play them." They hung them up on the willow trees that were there. V'sholtu b'nafshosam, and they, so to say, v'sholtu b'nafshosam means they did something very risky, very dangerous with themselves. What did they do? Nasnu elyone yadayim l'toch piyam. They stuck their thumbs into their mouths. Umeratzasim umakatzasim. Self-mutilation. They basically bit off the fingers that would have been needed to play those harps. So here they were, that they said, we don't want to be beaten into submission. We don't want Nebuchadnezzar to beat us into submission to play the music for him. But what are we going to do? How are we going to refuse? If we just refuse, say, no, we're not going to play you our songs, he'll send out a taskmaster to flog us, to whip us and beat us into submission. So what do? In his incredible act of, you might call it barbarism, but incredible act of, they want to make a statement that we refuse, we will not play God's songs for you. They stuck their thumbs in their mouths and they bit off their own. I can't even imagine that. biting off a finger, but that's what they did as a way of showing, as a way of saying how we refuse and you cannot force us. You cannot force us to play God's songs for you. That was how the Levium, how they stood up to Nebuchadnezzar. Absolutely terrible, gory, one of the forgotten aspects of Churban Bayis Rishon, of the destruction of the first temple. Here were these Levites, these Levium, who were so distraught over the prospect of being forced to play the music from the Beis HaMikdash for Nebuchadnezzar. They chose this path of self-mutilation, of biting off a finger to as a way of saying that no, we will not defile God by playing for you the same music we played for him in the Beis HaMikdash. Absolutely wild. That's what that medrash adds. Now, we're going to take this to one more level. I'm going to scroll down. Here's something I found. Or Sameach, they brought this down. That's why I have it here. Let's see. It says as follows. The missing Levites. Although the Torah awarded Meiser Rishon, that's the first tithe on agricultural produce, to the Levites, they lost their right to this important source of income because of a penalty imposed on them by Ezra. I gathered them together, writes Ezra, of the Jews whom he led from Babylon to Eretz Yisrael towards the end of their 70-year exile. And I found no Levites among them. That's in Ezra 8:15. Upset by the failure of the Levites to join in his effort to resettle Eretz Yisrael, Ezra penalized them that Meiser should no longer be given to them. According to one opinion, Meiser was to be given only to the poor. According to another opinion, it could also be given to Kohanim during their state of impurity, which prevented them from eating Truma and therefore rendered them impoverished. So let's pause there for a second. So what this is, a Gemara tells us this, and it's based on Ezra. You can look it up in your Tanakh. It's in Ezra 8:15. Ezra says he is despondent. We know that the Jews spent 70 years in Galus Bavel, in the Babylonian exile. After 70 years in the Babylonian exile, Hashem orchestrated events that the Persians, who had defeated the Babylonians during that time, allow the Jews to go back to rebuild the second Beis HaMikdash. Ezra leads the effort, together with Nehemiah, to bring Jews out of Bavel and bring them back to Israel. And despite his great efforts, he was not able to get the majority of the Jewish people to follow him. In those 70 years in Bavel, an incredible amount of assimilation and intermarriage takes place, and there are an incredible number of Jews who are not interested in going back to rebuild the Beis HaMikdash along with Ezra. And Ezra was very upset about this, and Nehemiah was very upset about this as well. Of particular notice, though, is in 8:15, he says he looks around at the crowd that he's marching back to Israel, and he sees there's no Levium. He says, how terrible is this? We're going back to Israel, to the Beis HaMikdash that we're going to rebuild. There's no Levium. He's so disappointed with Shevet Levi that Ezra passes a takana, passes a decree, taking away from them that which the Bible, that which the Chumash gave them, which was Meiser Rishon, the first tithe. So Ezra puts a kanas, Ezra puts a penalty on Shevet Levi that from here on in, you don't get Meiser Rishon anymore. I'm so disappointed in you. You should have been the spiritual leaders of Bnei Yisrael. And you refuse to come back to Israel, you're not entitled to Meiser Rishon anymore. From now on, Meiser Rishon goes to Aniyim or to Kohanim who are poor. That's how the Gemara learns based on Ezra 8:15. So I remember Rabbi Naiman said the following idea. He says, look what happened in 70 years. Who are the parents of these Levium? Those Levium that refused to go back to Eretz Yisrael with Ezra. Who are their fathers? Who are their grandfathers? They were the ones from Al Naros Bavel that the Medrash says put their thumbs in their mouth and bit off their thumbs. That's how much they respected Hashem. That's how much they loved Hashem and longed for the Beis HaMikdash. They could not imagine, they couldn't fathom playing the songs for the Beis HaMikdash for Nebuchadnezzar. And yet what happened? Their grandkids refused to go back to Israel. Those grandkids didn't want to go back, to the point that Ezra had to penalize them and says, I'm taking away your Meiser Rishon. You're not entitled to it anymore. Every one of those Levium who refused to go back to Israel grew up in a home where they sat at a table and they looked at either their father or grandfather who was missing a finger or a thumb, and they know why. They say, yeah, that grandfather, that father, they bit that off because that's how much it bothered them that the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed and what Nebuchadnezzar did. Yet, what happened? Those grandkids, They just weren't interested. They weren't interested in going back to Yerushalayim. It's amazing. It's astounding. I would have imagined if someone is descending from that type of a family with that type of lineage, they would have been the first on the ship to go back. But no, they weren't interested. What happened? So the truth of the matter is we don't know what happened. We don't know why some Jews were interested in returning and some weren't. We know there was incredible assimilation. We know there was incredible numbers of intermarriage. And Ezra was incredibly disappointed with the Jews of his time. But what we do know is there's no guarantee. Just because a parent, just because a grandparent could have displayed an incredible amount of love, of avas Hashem, of love for God, love for Akiva for Tzion, for Israel, a love for the Beis HaMikdash, feeling a profound sense of loss for the Beis HaMikdash. There's no guarantee that that's going to automatically get passed down to the kids in the mother's milk. Ultimately, every kid's going to have to make their own decision. And everyone, it might give people a leg up. It might give people an advantage if they got some great lineage and some ancestors who did some great things. But that alone doesn't act as a guarantee to make certain how the kids are going to play things out. I remember Rabbi Nyman was talking about this because he was specifically, I think it was a yortzeit of one of his parents. It could have been his father or his mother, I don't remember. And he was talking about at the time that he grew up in America, I believe it was in the 20s, and that he was saying how difficult it was to be a Shomer Shabbos, and those who remained Shomer Shabbos, those who wanted to be Shabbos observant and got fired all the time from their jobs and whatnot, they showed an incredible amount of Mesiras Nefesh, and he saw that from his parents. He saw it, and he says, but you can't take it for granted that was going to play itself out with everyone. He said he had many friends who he grew up with who saw the same thing that he saw. He saw his parents longing for Shabbos and feeling terrible about the desecration of Shabbos all around him and the economic hardships that they suffered. But for whatever reason, he decided to stay on track. And he raised a wonderful family full of Shabbos observing, mitzvah observing people. But he said that he saw many friends who grew up in very, very similar homes. They also saw the great Mesiras Nefesh. They saw the great self-sacrifice that their parents and grandparents as early immigrants to the country put in. Yet for one reason or another, and everyone's got a slightly different story, for one reason or another, they gave up. They didn't. Those kids did not take the path of life that Rabbi Nyman and his family did. How do you explain it? I don't know. Everyone's got their own story. But what you can say is there's no guarantees. Just because a parent or a grandparent could have had an incredible amount of devotion, that's no guarantee in itself that that's going to automatically get passed down to the kids. So we got to really make certain. We have to make efforts. We have to really make certain that we're not taking things for granted and that our heritage and our love of Torah, our love of mitzvahs, of Shabbos, of everything that makes us unique as mitzvah observing Jews, we have to really make an effort to make certain that the next generation is going to develop the love, the passion, and the interest in that. We cannot take anything for granted. That was the point Rabbi Nyman wanted to make of this. I'm just skipping to the last page for a second, then I'll come back to page 5. This is something that, I just took this off of an article that I was working on dealing with Sefer Shmuel. So the way I began this article is it says, here's a quote, Yichus, or that's pedigree, Yichus, is a lot like potatoes. Oftentimes the best part is underground. So I have in the note there, I heard this remark from Rabbi Beryl Wein during a Jewish history lecture a number of years ago. In personal communication with Rabbi Wein regarding the origins of this adage, he told me that while he was not aware of a specific source, he believes it to be one of our people's great Yiddish folk sayings. It's a great line. Yichus is a lot like potatoes. Oftentimes the best part is underground. Meaning what? The lineage. When someone says, do you know who my Zaidi was? Do you know who my Bobby was? Yeah, that's like the potato. That was the best part of the family. Unfortunately, he or she's underground. There's no guarantee that the kid who's yelling about that wonderful yichus has got anything in common. That's what I wrote here. While great ancestry might sometimes provide a person with a head start in life, pedigree offers no guarantee of achieving greatness. We've observed this reality in the world around us. We know this fact from our study of Jewish history, and we certainly know this to be true from countless episodes in Tanakh. And this case that Rabbi Nyman really brought home to us really illustrates this. It's a wild medrash, and it's fascinating to see how that played itself out. I want to just finish up here, showing you in this article I got here from Or Sameach, the missing Levites. Look where he goes with this. After introducing us to this concept that Ezra put a penalty on the Levium, he brings down, there seems to be a contradiction. The problem with this explanation, Tosfos points out, is the Mishnah in Kedushin clearly states that Levites were among the people who accompanied Ezra. This is also evident from the passage in Ezra 1:5, which lists Levites amongst those who were inspired to follow Ezra on his mission to rebuild the Beis HaMikdash in Jerusalem. So the question is, how do you have it both ways? There are indications in Ezra that the Levium he was so disappointed with that he took away their Meiser Rishon, but there are other indications that Levium did go back. How do you reconcile this? So he brings down a Rashi. Rashi in Kedushin supplies the solution to this mystery. When the Babylonian ruler Nebuchadnezzar took the Jews into captivity, he ordered them to play for him the music they had played in the Beis HaMikdash. Their heroic response is recorded in Tehillim. On the willow trees along the rivers of Babylon, we hung our harps. They cut off their own thumbs to make themselves incapable of playing music and protested. How can we play the songs of Hashem on foreign soil? So he writes as follows. This is how to resolve it. Levites subsequently born in Babylon did have the ability to play their musical instruments in the Beis HaMikdash, but only the thumbless ones returned with Ezra, meaning it was the Zaydis. It was the old men who 70 years earlier, as youngsters, they were the ones who cut off their thumbs. They're the ones, yes, some Levium went back, but which ones? The ones who went 70 years ago had that great sense of commitment. But their offspring, their kids and their grandkids, they weren't interested. That's why Ezra took away Meiser Rishon from them. Only the thumbless ones returned with Ezra. This was viewed by Ezra as a blatant lack of interest in rebuilding the Beis HaMikdash and restoring it to its former glory with the music of Levites, and he therefore penalized them regarding Meiser. That's what he brings down. So this is just absolutely fascinating. So just to review quickly, we started off today with the 9 days, a beautiful story from Rav Kook, that how he paskined in this very unique case, a very unique set of circumstances that was obviously limited to a particular time and a particular set of surrounding circumstances, that Poel Mizrahi kitchen during the 9 days could continue serving meals. And this would be a Su'udas mitzvah because it was getting Jews who were not keeping kosher to keep kosher otherwise. And therefore, even the committed Jews who would have kept kosher, they were participating in a Su'udas mitzvah. By enabling Jews to keep kosher, they could eat meat as well. Fascinating idea. Reminds us of how important it is to act in a fashion, any fashion we can, to facilitate, to bring any Jew closer to Torah and mitzvos, how important that is, how beloved that is. That's an incredible festive occasion. Number two, we spoke about what the Shulchan Aruch talks, that every Jew, it would be appropriate for every God-fearing Jew to mourn the loss of the Beis HaMikdash throughout the year, not just on Tisha B'Av. The Mishnah Berurah quotes the Shalah by saying that we, in order to do this, Al Naros Bavel should be recited during the week before benching, Shir Amalos before benching on Shabbos. Again, we said that's really unheard of. I'm just not familiar with people doing that on a regular basis. The most I've seen was at camp during the 9 days, probably because of the fact no one before the Shalah had codified this and issued this. It's not in the Shulchan Aruch. It's again, the Shalah was writing an ethical teaching. This probably wasn't something that the masses, that the throngs of the members, the Hamon Am of Klal Yisrael ever accepted on themselves. The Gemara doesn't break it down. But nonetheless, we still took a look at chapter 137, Kuf Lamed Zayin of Al Naros Bavel. We took a look at it. We saw what Rashi said about it. We saw the Medrash that really opens up that paragraph of Tehillim, tells us about the story that was playing itself out, that's being described in David HaMelech's writing there. And then we also brought out the point from Rabbi Naiman that there's no guarantee. The incredible Mesiras Nefesh, incredible acts of devotion by ancestors, they might provide their kids, the offspring, with some head start, but ultimately every child is going to have to make decisions for him or herself what type of life they're going to lead. No parent, no grandparent should ever view themselves as an abject failure just because their children or grandchildren chose a different course. Again, for all we know, we can't blame someone unless there's any indication. Unless you look at Tanakh, you can't blame Avram Avinu for the way Yishmael turned out. You can't blame Yitzchak for the way Esav turned out. Yes, some of the greatest people throughout history have had children that did not follow their lead. That's not an automatic indication that the parents messed up. What it means is for whatever, unless the pasuk clearly tells us that's what happened, But unless the pasuk tells us that would happen, what we have to assume is that children ultimately make their own decisions. There's a lot of temptations pulling everyone in various directions. So great acts of devotion on the part of ancestors, that alone is not a guarantee how the children will turn out. And it really is incumbent on us to do everything we can to foster an environment, create an environment, put kids in an environment, and provide them with positive, happy, Jewish, enriching experiences. That'll be the best formula that we can put into action to try and guarantee that the next generation of Jews will want to live their lives, committed Jews who are committed to Torah, committed to mitzvahs, because they see that it enhances their lives, enriches their lives, and truly makes their lives more meaningful. But anything short of that, we can't put any guarantees on. All right, with that, I'm going to conclude there. I'm going to unmute.